thank you so much. Thank you so much, Juan Jun, for this introduction and for your invitation to be part of this conversation. I will start by, sorry, I have to familiarize myself. I will start my remarks with a citation by reading a piece by Paul Davies. He is a quantum physicist, and he talks about the relevance of cosmologies for politics, for the way we understand the world. Cosmologies might seem like a rarefied discipline, but in many indirect ways, it touches everyone. We all have a need to know why the world, how we fit in the world, and we need to find an answer to how we came to exist. Societies have always tried to find this kind of explanations to myths, accounts which weren't really scientific, but stories intended to place human beings in the context of grand schemes. When Copernicus declared that the Earth goes around the sun, he shattered at the anthropocentric model of the cosmos that had prevailed for centuries. To be sure, the immediate effect on daily life was minor. There were no riots, no war, no economic disruptions. Yet, over time, the knowledge that we are not located at the center of the universe fundamentally transformed the context of all human existence. The impact was felt not only in science, but in religion, sociology, and economics too. Today, we are poised to undergo a shift in perspective even more disruptive than initiated by Copernicus. And this shift is the shift that is generated by debates around quantum physics. So scientific discourses are not a separate sphere of society. They are part of social cultures. They contribute to shape ontologies, causal stories. Ontologies are political and causal stories are political. This seems to be obvious for some, but in the social sciences, we had a lot of pushback when we proposed that quantum social theory is a new way of thinking about social phenomena. In fact, it's obvious, sorry, I forgot to move the slides. So even people who are very critical of the translation of quantum language into the social have accepted that worldviews and scientific advances are inseparable. Some scholars in international relations, and I belong to that discipline, so I will talk about my literatures. Some scholars like Bentley Allen, Milja Kurki, Peter Katzenstein have shown that cosmologies have a bearing in shaping political discourses. Decolonial scholars argue that Western civilization was built on entities and denotation, not on relations, and that an epistemic reconstitution is central to the decolonial enterprise and practice. In the meantime, biology and medicine have embraced holistic explanation of evolution and disease. For instance, epigenetic and integrated oncology are pioneering this kind of move. So the relevance of quantum physics for social sciences is not really new. Dana Zohar wrote a book in the 1990s making arguments in this regard. More recently, Alex Wendt and Karen Barad have pioneered the rethinking of the relevance of quantum for social science. There have been several panels on quantum social sciences at the International Studies Association in the United States. The Carnegie Corporation has sponsored an interdisciplinary project at the University of Sydney, and prominent journals like Security Dialogue, Millennium, International Theory, Global Studies Quarterly, among others, have published articles and special issues on quantum social theory. So there is a debate out there, and I will quickly outline for the ones who may not be as familiar as others on the dimensions of this debate, its main trajectories. Some scholars, like Alexander Wendt, in his 2015 book, has argued that the world is quantum, that we can rethinking human subject as quantum walking waves, is in a way a quantum realist. Others have used quantum to interpret economic phenomena. Some scholars have instead argued that quantum models offer better ways for analyzing social phenomena. So some have looked at the problem of agency and structure as an interaction of quantum waves. This is the work of Michael Murphy. Others have studied intergenerational trauma through quantum models, and some have used quantum concepts to analyze the spreading of the COVID pandemic. So where do I position myself in this debate? Well, I look at quantum as an ontological critique. So as an ontological critique, quantum addresses how first principles are embedded in our way of thinking. And they are present in these ways of thinking, but they are not always made explicit. What I'm also interested in is the political implication of these onto-epistemologies, these first principles and the ways of knowing that are connected to it. So, in this book that was published a few years ago, I look at how quantum provides ways of rethinking who we are as subjects, how we relate to other living and non-living beings, how we can study the world, and how we can think we can change it. So there is clearly in Western social science an influence of substantialist Newtonian assumption in the discipline of IR to include realism, constructivism, and structuralism. And more recently, I've also been very intrigued by exploring the colonial implication of Newtonian worldviews and the family resemblances of quantum worldviews with the ways of thinking of the world of the native people of the Americas. So, quantum theory offers a very different way of thinking about the universe from Newtonianism. Causality is not linear. The universe is not imagined as a clock. We've heard from speakers earlier about the problem of uncertainty, which seems to be something that is increasingly interesting as an analytical category. Quantum social scientist Karen Barad has argued that the world is not made of entities, but of phenomena. She relies on the work of quantum physicist Niels Bohr. And what interests me about the work of Karen Barad is the centrality of the notion of the apparatus. And I will comment a little bit more on this and how central it is on my way of thinking about ethics, and also about artificial intelligence, even though artificial intelligence has not been the center of my explorations per se. So, apparatuses are not observation instruments. They are performative. They produce morphogenetic effects. They change what is observed through the apparatus. They cause some what Karen Barad calls ontological cuts. This doesn't mean that the world can be constructed by the apparatus. Matter matters. Not all possibilities are always open, but it's also malleable. We've heard earlier about the possibility that the rules of the universe are not necessarily all set, that there is a randomness and there is a possibility that we can interact with what exists, and that interaction generates different causal effects. Okay. So there is also in quantum social science an attempt to redefine matter. For Alex Wendt, for instance, matter is not the inert, dead thing that exists in Newtonian physics, but he embraced panpsychism. I have some predicament with this position, but it's an interesting one because it challenges in a way the ontological divide between the res cogitans and the res extensa that has been at the root of the Cartesian way of thinking that has very much shaped Western philosophy and ethics. So, what happens if instead of imagining the world as a big clock, the manifestation of a master plan that is already written, we think about it as unfolding and ourselves as being responsible for the cascade effects we produce? And what if we embrace uncertainty as the foundation, the starting point of ethics, instead of certainty? And I ask this question because I push back against one of the pillars of the Western way of thinking about our agency in the world and how we should adjudicate right or wrong, which is Kantian ethic and the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative aspires to give us a mathematical and universally valid formula for acting beyond circumstances. And this way of thinking presupposes a world that is flat, causally homogeneous, where circumstantial factors do not matter. If we start instead from the apparatus, and we accept that the apparatus is performative, the very material connections that are embedded in the apparatus do matter. Karen Barad's notion of apparatus is very Foucauldian. For Michel Foucault, the notion of the apparatus is an ensemble, an entanglement of power, knowledge, and physical devices. So the physicality of the apparatus and the broader relations within which it's produced are relevant for what we observe, for our way of intervening in the world. And if we accept that the starting point for our way of looking at the world is the apparatus, then the whole implant of the Kantian ethics collapses, because there is no possibility of adjudicating right or wrong based on abstractions only, but contextual considerations are key. The choice of apparatus is fundamental because it produces ontological effects. And as I've said, universal principles are not good enough to make good ethical decisions because they miss considerations of the specificity of situation and the means to ends. And why I'm saying this, I need to step back for a second, because before becoming an academic, I was a peacekeeper at the United Nations. And we were very good at acting to bring about peace based upon abstract principle, bring about democracy, human rights for all, and so on and so forth, with very little considerations of the means we had to bring about those aspirational statements. And every time we failed, which was very often, we justified ourselves with the unintended consequences. And I think there is a problem here. One cannot start from abstractions. One has to consider always how questions. Okay, so here I will go quickly through this, but we need to abandon the idea that as subjects we are endowed with some characteristics of some kind. This has been one of the assumptions of the economists. They say that we're all profit maximizers. The liberals have argued that we're all endowed with freedom. Marxists have said that we are a victim of alienation. Well, maybe we should be a little bit less substantialist. We should look at exactly how we come to being a subject within specific kind of entanglements between our agency and the situational context within which we are embedded, what kind of cards we are dealt with, right? In a quantum world, we can also accept that small causal forces may generate big cascade effects. In this, the concept of diffraction proposed by Karen Barad is very useful. Diffraction has to do with the notion of waves, and wave propagates through means, and by propagating through means, they may get amplified or reduced in their force. They change their shape according to the shape of the holes, for instance, they go through, and they may cancel or reinforce each other by encountering each other in different ways. So we cannot think about causality in a linear manner, but we need to think about causality as a wave, and the diffraction different waves generate by traveling through different media. Linear way of thinking is deeply insufficient and analytically very limited, especially when we have to deal with things like AI, which is an apparatus that, as we have heard, is continuously changing by interacting with humans. We cannot really predict in the classical experimental way what it will do and how. Again, ethical decision and political decision must be adjudicated in the context of practices. How questions means to end are fundamental, and also contextual connections. Not Karen Barad, but Isabel Stenger, and she's not a quantum, she's a philosopher of science, proposed the idea of ecologies of practices. And ecologies of practices are webs of connections that interact with other webs of connections. So we need to practice a way of knowing that look at connections and that looks at the different ecologies of practice with which what we are talking about is connected. If we talk about AI, we cannot just talk about the technicality of it. We cannot just talk about computer, not only even about the interactions between the users of computers and computers. We need to talk also about the energy consumption, the impact of human rights of the ones who extract the cobalt from the mines, the kind of biases that are embedded in it, and of course the potential this tool has, but also the other practices that seem to be very far away but are actually connected to the practice of our use of these tools. Okay, so I'm getting to my conclusions here. So we cannot think that we can shape the world at our image to include AI. We don't know where it goes. We need to abandon linear way of thinking. I think this linear way of thinking stifles political imaginaries. We need to embrace uncertainty, and creativity and responsibilities and prudence, in my view, are key ethical and political virtues. In this sense, quantum ethics both raises the bar and opens up possibility for agency. We don't need to change the whole system at once, but we need to responsibly intervene in the contextual situations within which we are called to act. And then this is, I just put this slide there because I think quantum social theory has a lot of connection with non-Western cosmologies. And in particular, I just started to explore, and I have an article that is forthcoming on this, the connections with native people of the Americas way of thinking, and the notion of responsibility, performativity, and co-creation are fundamental in the views of those societies. These are not sciences in the way we understand science, but they are worldviews that shows a lot of family resemblance with the cosmologies that quantum theorists, or at least some of the quantum theorists, have invited us to consider. Thank you very much.